My kids wanted a $500 toy. I'm a CPA. That math didn't work. But they wanted to build, so I found a $120 alternative, but it was too dangerous to leave out. To save the tool, I had to build a room. This is a story about how trying to save a few dollars led to a 160 square foot math problem. This build started with something called a chomp saw. I looked it up, and the eye-watering price tag shut that idea down immediately. That's when I discovered something called a nibbler. Naturally, I checked the price and found a surprisingly affordable one for $120. Ordered it. When it arrived, it was heavy, solid, felt like a proper tool. Also very loud, which immediately raised a different concern. This isn't something you just leave lying around for kids, even supervised. It needs to be contained, secured, designed in a way that made it safe to use. And that's when the project quietly changed. Because once you start building a proper enclosure for something heavy like that, portability goes out the window. And if it's not portable, and not something they can use freely, then it needs a permanent home. So I decided, instead of bringing the tool to them, I'd bring them their own space. A little nook inside the house, somewhere they could build, experiment, and make a mess. Sort of a workshop. The best spot? Under the basement stairs. This whole area is about 7 feet deep and 3 feet wide, but the back 3 feet only has about 3 feet of height because of the stairs above. So I'm thinking of turning that back section into a kind of hidden room, about 3 feet deep, 3 feet wide, and 3 feet high. Then the space above that 3 foot height can be used for storage, maybe electrical, maybe even a small drawer if I can make it fit. Now, if you're building a proper workshop, it needs a proper workbench. And if there's a workbench, then there has to be a vise. I started looking around. Cheapest vise I found was about $70, and I'd still have to install it. But then I came across something interesting. A compact portable workbench, built-in vise, dog holes, the whole setup, for around $80. Well, that was an easy decision. When it showed up, I was honestly impressed. Solid build, good quality for the price, and it saved me a ton of time not having to install a vise myself. All I had to do was build around it, and since it can be easily lifted and removed, it saves me the headache for when the kids inevitably drop things into those dog holes. Simple enough, except the space itself was anything but. Rusty nails, screws sticking out, rough framing everywhere, and definitely not a place you'd call kid-friendly. So now we're finishing the space too. I started looking at options. Drywall, OSB, plywood, tongue and groove panels, and the price differences were confusing. Drywall was cheap, wood panels, not so much. But I kept thinking, why? So I did what I usually do, overcomplicated it with math. If I bought about 45 2x4s for roughly $180, ripped 35 of them down the middle, I'd end up with 2 boards per piece, each about 8 foot long, 3.5 inch wide, roughly 3/4 inch thick. That gives me about 4.6 square feet per 2x4. Multiply that across 35 boards, and I'm covering about 160 square feet. In my head, that was enough, and even if I needed more, the cost still felt manageable. So that's what I did. Picked up 45 2x4s, had them cut down in half so I could actually get them home, ripped 35 of them, sanded off the grade stamps, gave everything a clean pass with 220 grit, because that's what I had a lot of, and stacked them neatly in the basement. All while using the remaining 10 2x4s for framing and figuring out the workbench. But for the same square footage, if you can bring in full 8-foot 2x4s, you'd probably need fewer boards overall. With my 4-foot pieces, whenever I needed a 3-foot section, I had to cut it and waste the remaining 1 foot, because it's basically unusable. But with 8-foot boards, you could cut 1 3-foot piece and still have a 5-foot offcut left. Or cut 2 3-foot pieces and have a 2-foot offcut left, which is actually useful for something else. At this point, everything still made sense. No major flaws, no red flags. Except one small detail. The cost. Because somehow I was now approaching the price of the original Chomp Saw. But I justified it, because I wasn't just buying a tool anymore, I was building a space. Something lasting. Something they could grow into. And then naturally, I thought, it would be nice to add lighting. And maybe a drawer. Because let's be honest, once you have a workspace, you suddenly have a lot of things to put away. And just like that, one thing led to another, and before I knew it, the cost had blown way past a few $100s. But the nook, it just kept getting better. If you're watching me frame this and thinking, what an idiot, or what is this guy doing? You're not wrong. I've never done anything like this before, and that's exactly why I'm doing it. You've got to start somewhere. Honestly, if you see something I messed up, I'd really appreciate you pointing it out. Maybe I can fix it, and if not, I'll definitely carry that lesson into the next build, because there will be a next one. Also, I don't have a brad nailer. I looked into it, but even the cheapest ones are around $100, and then you need an air compressor, which just blows up the cost of the whole project. Since I usually work with hardwoods, joinery, and glue, I've never really needed one. So for this build, I stuck with screws. Two 2-inch screws per panel, and 3-inch screws to anchor the 2x4s into the studs. Because the space under the stairs sits at roughly a 45-degree slope, any lights I mounted directly would basically blind you the moment you stepped in. And I didn't want to go down the path of buying expensive adjustable or swiveling fixtures just to aim them properly. So I grabbed some scrap 2x6 I had lying around, drilled a 2.5-inch hole into each piece to fit the lights. They were about $40 for a pack of 6 and came with solid instructions. Then I cut the 2x6s at roughly 45 degrees to match the slope, mounted the lights into them, and that was that. I also hid the screws holding these blocks in place so they give off that floating look. I went with 2x6 mostly because it gave me more room to work with on the bandsaw, but honestly 2x4s would have done the job just fine. And now that I see them installed, I'm pretty sure 2x4s would have actually been the better fit for the 2.5-inch lights. But live and learn. Recently, one of you suggested using magnets to hold things like box lids, and that turned out to be a great idea. I picked some up from Amazon and used them to secure the electrical panel so it stays in place but can still be easily removed. I really do pay attention to what you guys share, and I appreciate it. This was one of those suggestions that worked perfectly. And finally, the Nibbler, the main event. I'll admit, I was almost ready to skip the whole Chomp Saw and Nibbler story and just post this as a kid's workshop build. Because things got really out of control once I started trying to encase this thing. See, if I was building just a box for the Nibbler, this would have been easy. But I had too many variables to line up, and that's where it got tricky. At first, and honestly I don't know what I was thinking, I set it up so the feed direction was sideways. I thought it might be safer, but once I had everything cut and in place, it became obvious pretty quickly, it just wasn't intuitive. So I reworked the layout and brought the feed direction straight from the front. Much better. There was a lot to consider from both a safety and durability perspective. I needed it completely bulletproof, couldn't move, no chance of it coming loose, and absolutely no way for the kids to access anything underneath the workbench. Only the tip of the tool could stick out. There had to be enough ventilation, and the power setup needed to be an easy button, so they didn't have to crawl under to turn it on. And of course, it all had to line up perfectly with the vise I had installed, so everything sits flush at the same height, because that's what a proper workbench demands. My goodness, this was a nightmare. I went through a dozen or maybe more iterations before I landed on a final setup. Measure, cut, assemble, then nope, it didn't fit, recalculate, adjust, try again, still not right. Frustrating, annoying, tedious. On top of that, I had to figure out the power supply, hide the wiring, make sure none of it was accessible, tuck the lighting and Nibbler supply into a hidden panel so everything looked clean and safe. This was a real headache, getting the height just right. I started cutting strips of 3/4 inch plywood in different thicknesses, stacking and testing until I could dial it in perfectly. The goal was to minimize the opening as much as possible. Ideally, tight enough that not even a 1/8 inch piece could slip through. But that's easier said than done, because everything has a bit of give. 2x4 softwood, plywood, they all flex slightly under pressure. So I kept going back and forth, adjusting, testing, recutting, until I finally landed on this odd combination of plywood shims underneath the top layer that got me exactly where I needed to be. Once the nibbler was finally locked in, it was time for testing, with the real users. My kids put it through its paces. I mean, they ran it for a solid 45 minutes straight, chopping up every piece of cardboard and paper they could find. And the nibbler held up, no overheating, no issues. It didn't even flinch. But those test runs revealed something else. This thing creates a ton of waste. It was everywhere. So now, new problem, new requirement. I needed a way to contain it. There was no way I was vacuuming this entire nook after every session, so I built a simple solution, a waste trap. I closed off the area behind the nibbler so all the debris gets pushed or blown back into one contained spot. Now instead of cleaning everything, we just vacuum that one area and we're done. You'll see what I mean in just a bit. But this build, it just kept going. I had to learn about subfloors, flooring, things I've never really dealt with before. At first, I thought I'd just lay down some leftover hardwood from our home renovation. Turns out, you can't do that directly on concrete. So in came the dry core subfloor. Each tile is 2x2 feet, about $7 each, and I used 8 of them. Then I figured I'd finish the paneling before the floor. But before I could panel, I had to finalize the workbench. That meant trimming things down, removing excess. And once I did that, I realized I needed more framing around it just to support the panels. It was constant, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Every time I thought I was ready to move on, I'd realize I missed something and had to go back and fix it. I also picked up a foot-operated power switch and routed the nibbler through it. The idea was to mount it to the workbench so it had to be intentionally activated, not something that could be turned on by accident. This build has given me a whole new level of respect for people who build houses, because I realized something about myself while working on it. I am far more impatient than I thought. Let me explain. When I'm building furniture, I love the process. I'll grab a pencil and sketch out ideas, work through details, take as much time as I need. I'll buy the wood and let it sit for weeks. I'll stand in the garage just looking at it, studying the grain, deciding what I want to highlight, what I want to hide, where the joinery should go, how each piece will come together. It's slow, deliberate, and I enjoy every second of it. But when it came to framing this space with 2x4s, making sure everything was level, straight, square, I found myself getting frustrated. It felt unnecessary, even though I knew it absolutely wasn't. It felt like these steps were just in the way, like obstacles between me and the finished result. And I couldn't figure out why the same patience, the same interest, the same level of care just wasn't there. Why did it disappear? And then it clicked. It's because this kind of work doesn't ask for creativity, it demands compliance. At my day job, I'm already operating in that world. Financial reporting, rules, standards, things have to be done a certain way. No interpretation, no shortcuts, just precision and consistency. And the garage, that's my escape from all of that. But framing? Framing pulled me right back into it. Level, square, straight, over and over again. There's no real room for interpretation, and most of it will never ever even be seen. In my usual builds, time spent feels like progress. Even if I'm just standing there staring at a board, I'm making decisions, I'm refining something, moving it forward. But with framing, it's different. I spent hours getting everything perfectly level, and when I stepped back and looked at it, it looked exactly the same as if I had rushed it. My eyes couldn't tell the difference. I knew the difference would show up later, when I start paneling, when things need to line up, but in that moment, it just felt like friction, not progress. Then there was the floor transition. With the subfloor and vinyl planks, the height ended up much higher than the bare concrete in the basement, so I started looking for a transition piece around an inch tall. I found a few, but they were expensive and had long delivery times. Most of the readily available options were only about half an inch, so I picked up a half-inch rubber transition about 6 foot long for $40. Figured I could double it up to get the height I needed. But I also didn't want to drill into the concrete, so instead I used some leftover vinyl flooring, cut a 2-inch wide, 3 foot long strip, glued that down to the concrete, and built the rubber transition on top of it. That solved the height issue. But then the plank edges. I tried to cut them clean and straight, but they weren't perfect, so now I needed a way to hide those uneven ends too. Luckily, my local store has a scrap bin. I found a leftover strip for about $5, and it did the job perfectly. Cleaned up the edges and tied everything together nicely. A couple of unplanned but really nice outcomes from this design. First, I had to use 2 pieces of plywood for the workbench top around the nibbler because I didn't have a single sheet big enough. But that seam landed right down the middle, pointing toward the nibbler, and it actually turned into a perfect visual guide for the kids on feed direction. Second, placing the vise right up against the wall means you can't just spin it closed quickly. They have to turn it slowly, 1 turn at a time, which honestly makes it a lot safer and reduces the chances of fingers getting caught. And finally, all the leftover scrap pieces found a home. I used them for the trim around the entrance and even built a couple small shelves. Overall, I made a real effort to minimize waste. And it shows. There's barely anything left over. Whatever remains is now stored in the drawer I built, ready for the kids to use in their own projects. The biggest flaw in my approach, looking back, was this. If I had just gone with pre-finished panels, it would have cost more, but I could have easily bought more if I ran short. With the 2x4 route, I found myself obsessing over minimizing waste. Because if I ran out, it wasn't just a quick trip to grab more. It meant buying more 2x4s, ripping them down, sanding, cleaning, then letting them acclimate, adding at least a couple of weeks to the timeline. So if you're going this route, I'd suggest planning for more than you think. Instead of the usual 10% buffer, go closer to 20%. The extra cost in lumber is minimal, but it can save you a lot of time and hassle if you come up short. I'll show you 2 boards I would have redone if I had more stock left, but since I didn't, I had to keep them as is. Maybe I'll fix them down the line, but for now I want to keep this real and show the actual limitations and trade-offs that come with a build like this. But finally, after all trial and error, here's the setup that works, and I couldn't be happier with it. And lastly, thank you. Seriously, anyone who clicks on these videos, I appreciate it more than you know. I'm still figuring out this whole YouTube thing, especially thumbnails and titles. So if you've got tips, I'm all ears. I'm very open to feedback, so don't hold back. And if you enjoyed the build, feel free to like and share it. It really does help.